Chapter 14. The Party of the Year. Engraved invitations to Jim Williams' black tie Christmas party began arriving in the mailbox of Savannah's better homes the first week of December. They were received with surprise and consternation, for it had been assumed that under the circumstances, Williams would not be giving any party at all this year. Faced with the invitations, Savannah's social set grappled with the realization that the crowning event of the winter season was going to take place at the scene of a notorious shooting, and that barely a month later the host would go on to trial for murder. What to do? Savannah was a place of manners and decorum, first and foremost. It had been the birthplace, after all, of Ward McAllister, that self-appointed social arbiter of late 19th century America. It was Ward McAllister who had compiled the list of New York's Elite 400 in 1892. This son of Savannah had codified the rules of conduct for ladies and gentlemen. The lively debate already raging over William's guilt or innocence shifted focus, moving to the question of whether it was proper for him to give his Christmas party, and whether, since he was indeed going to give it, it was proper to attend. This year, instead of asking, "Have you been invited?" people wanted to know, "Are you going to accept?" Millicent Moreland had counselled Williams not to give his party. "It wouldn't be the thing to do, Jim," she told him, and she thought that she had talked him out of it until her invitation arrived. For Mrs. Moreland, the party posed an agonizing dilemma. After many sleepless nights, she decided not to go. Williams refused to acknowledge that his party might be a manifestation of poor taste. He and his lawyers, he said, had decided that to not have the party would be an admission of guilt. Therefore, he was going to have it. He would, however, skip the all-male party the night after. "The only person who's really going to miss out on that one," Williams said, "will be Leopold Adler. He won't be able to get his binoculars out and spy on it." Williams was convinced that Lee Adler had prodded the district attorney into charging him with murder instead of the lesser crime, Williams was convinced that Lee Adler had prodded the district attorney into charging him with murder instead of a lesser crime, while outwardly pretending to be concerned for him. 2 days after the shooting, Emma Adler had written Williams a note expressing her sorrow and offering a way to help in any way possible. She had signed the note, "Fondly, Emma." "The use of the word fondly," said Williams, "proves the letter was an The use of the word fondly," said Williams, "proves the letter was an exercise in insincerity. Emma Adler is no more fond of me than I am of her, and we both know it." Williams did not invite the Adlers to this year's party. As in years past, Williams set about making elaborate preparations well in advance. His assistants went out and gathered 3 truckloads of fresh palmetto fronds, cedar boughs, and magnolia leaves, and spent a full week decorating the 7 fireplaces and 6 chandeliers of Mercer House. On the day of the party, Lucille Wright arrived with roasts of ham, turkey and beef, gallons of shrimp and oysters, tureens of dips and sauces, and quantities of cakes, brownies and pies. She arranged the bountiful repast on silver platters and placed them around the mound of pink and white camellias in the centre of the dining room. A 60-foot garland of flame-throated orchids hung in swags around the spiral stairway. The scent of cedar and pine accented the air. At 7 o'clock sharp, Williams opened the front door of Mercer House and stood with his mother and sister, Dorothy Kingery, to receive his guests. The 2 women wore evening gowns. Williams had on black tie and dinner jacket, with Russian Imperial Fabergé cufflinks gleaming in the cuffs of his dress shirt. He took a deep breath. "Now, I'll find out who my real friends are." He did not have long to wait. His first arrivals were already coming up the walk, and they kept coming. Dozens, scores, over 100. Each greeted Williams with warm expressions of support, then left their coats with an attendant in the study. If the mood was subdued at first, it picked up quickly as more and more guests arrived. White-jacketed butlers circulated with trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres. "Pour with a heavy hand," Williams had told the bartender. Soon, the laughter and hilarity rose to such a pitch it drowned out the cocktail pianists at the grand piano. Williams had invited 200 people and set a goal for himself of 150 acceptances. It was clear he had made his goal. In his own mind, at least, he had won a plebiscite of the social set. After an hour, he left his post in the receiving line and mingled with his guests. "What sort of people have come?" I asked him. "And what sort have stayed away?" "The holier-than-thou set stayed at home," he said. "The ones who have always been jealous of my success in Savannah and who want to let me know they disapprove. In addition to them, some of the people who honestly wish me well but are afraid to admit it publicly have also stayed home. The people you see here tonight are the ones who are secure enough to ignore anyone who might question their decision to come. Like that lady over there, Alice Dowling. Her late husband was the U.S. ambassador to Germany and Korea. She's talking with Malcolm McLean, the former mayor of Savannah and head of one of Savannah's leading law firms. The little old lady, immediately to McLean's right, is one of 7 women who founded the historic Savannah Foundation, Jane Wright. She's descended from the 3rd Royal Governor of Georgia. Now, to her right, you will see a distinguished-looking man with a fine white mustache. He is Bob Menace, one of the most brilliant and influential financiers in Savannah. His great-great-grandfather was one of the first white men born in the state. He's Jewish, a blue-blood Georgia Jew, the only Jew in the Oglethorpe Club. To his right, the 2 men talking in the doorway are George Patterson, the retired president of the Liberty National Bank, and Alexander Yearly, the former chairman of Robertson Humphrey, the big Atlanta investment bankers. Williams had a look of a poker player holding 4 aces. "Now over there by the piano," he went on, "the lady in the bright red dress and the contralto voice, she's Vera Dunton Strong, talking non-stop as usual. She's the heiress to the Dunton Popewood Foundation and lives in a giant palace in Ardsley Park. It's fit for an embassy. Vera raises champion poodles. She's got about a dozen, and at least 7 of them sleep right in the bedroom with her and her husband, Cahill. Vera's audience, at the moment, appears to be the director of the Telfair Museum, Alexander Gaudery, which is a blessing because she won't give him the chance to get a word in, and nobody wants to hear what he has to say anyhow." As we walked past Vera Strong and the museum director, we caught a snippet of their conversation. "The bloodlines on both sides are magnificent," Mrs. Strong was saying. "You should see the way she carries herself. She has an even temperament and bright eyes. She's very intelligent." "Not another dog," Williams cut in. "Who said anything about a dog?" Mrs. Strong replied. "Now, don't be coy, Vera," said Williams. "Magnificent bloodlines, even temperament. No one begrudges you another poodle. Come on, fess up." Vera Strong suddenly gasped. "My God, how embarrassing. I was talking about Peter's fiancée. I'm going to be a mother-in-law." She threw her head back and laughed, and she clutched Williams by the arm. "You must swear you'd never tell anybody what I just said." Having sworn Williams to secrecy, she turned back to the couple standing next to her. "Did you hear that? Jim overheard me talking about Peter's fiancée, It's simply too mortifying. I was just saying. Williams turned aside. Well, that's very strong. One of her many saving graces is her sense of humor. Now those two, he said, nodding towards a handsome middle-aged man and woman, are Roger and Claire Moultrie. He was president of Savannah Gas Company until about 15 years ago, when they got involved in a bit of a scandal. One night they drove out to a secluded spot along the river and parked their car. A night watchman came by and told them to leave because they were trespassing on the grounds of some shipyard or another. They refused to budge. The watchman called the cops. A cop came and demanded identification. Roger became belligerent and scuffled with the policeman. At that point, Claire grabbed a pistol out of the glove compartment and shouted, "Duck, Roger! I'll kill the son of a bitch!" The cop dragged her out of the car and pummeled her so badly she spent a week in the hospital. Both were charged with trespassing, drunkenness, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest, and she was threatening the life of a policeman, and he was striking a police officer. Roger refused the judge's suggestion to pay a small fine and be done with it, so they went to trial. At the trial, Roger said they had driven to the moonlight spot to inspect the installation of gas lines, and that therefore, in so many words, they had been on company business. The most respected citizens of Savannah lined up to serve as character witnesses, and the jury delivered its verdict in 25 minutes, innocent of all charges. Those two don't feel they have the right to answer to anybody. It's probably why they're here tonight. Williams looked around the room. That man over there in the formal hunting outfit is Harry Cram. He's a legend. Williams was speaking of a patrician gentleman, about 70, who was wearing a scarlet tailcoat with gold embroidery over one pocket. Harry Cram has never worked a day in his life, said Williams. He's one of the first remittance men to come to the Low Country. His family sends monthly checks from Philadelphia, with the understanding he'll never go back there. And he leads a high life of high style, traveling around the world, hunting, drinking, and playing polo. He's a wild man, completely charming. The woman standing next to him is his fourth wife, Lucy. They live out on Devil's Elbow, a huge wooded island off Bluffton, South Carolina. There's a George Singer Sargent portrait of Harry's grandfather in the dining room. In his formal hunting togs, Harry Cram looked a fit suspect for a Sargent portrait himself. Harry used to amuse himself by flying over friends' houses in private planes and bombing them with bags of flour aimed for the chimney, he said. One time, he rode into the old DeSoto Hotel on horseback. He's a daredevil and a superb marksman. While he was living out at Foot Point Plantation, he'd invite people for Sunday lunch and tell them, "Now be sure to arrive by noon." And he meant it. At 11:45, he'd take a drink and his rifle and climb into the tree where he could watch his guests coming up the long driveway. At the stroke of noon, he'd aim through the telescopic sights and shoot the hood ornaments off the cars of the latecomers, just to let them know they were late. Williams caught Harry Cram's eye from across the room and started moving in his direction. One last story before we say hello to Harry, Williams said. About 5 years ago, 2 Paris Island mariners swam over to Harry's Island in frogman suits and broke into the house. They took Harry's 16-year-old son Peter at bayonet point down the hall to Harry's bedroom door. Peter called out, "Dad, there's 2 men with bayonets. They say they're going to kill me. unless you give him some money. Harry called back through the door, "All right, just let me get the money." Peter knew what to expect, so the moment Harry flung the door open, he ducked. Harry fired 2 shots with his .38 and hit both Marines right between the eye. At this point, Williams and I were standing in front of Cram. "I didn't hear you ask for a ginger ale, did I, Harry?" Williams asked with mock alarm. "I'm afraid you did," said Cram. "Isn't it shameful? I'm on the wagon, believe it or not. It's been about a year now." Cram had bright, darting eyes and wispy hair that stood straight up on the top of his head like the crest of a snowy egret. "Lucy brought me to the Veterans Hospital in Charlestown, drunk as a fiddler's bitch. Apparently, they asked me who the president was. They always ask drunks that. I hadn't the vaguest idea, so they put me in something called the tank. I was there a week, and I haven't wanted a drink since. I have no idea what they did to me. I've been meaning to ask." Mrs. Cram nodded. "The time had definitely come," she said. "Harry wanted to play William Tell and shoot an apple off my head." "I must say, though," said Harry, "I've never shot badly during my drinking years, and I don't think I was ever sober from the age of 16. I've gone on the wagon a few times in my life, but I always got off it in a hurry. This dinner jacket's proof of that. See this little hole?" Cram pointed to a small hole below his breast pocket. "One time, years ago, I stopped drinking and locked all the liquor in the closet. Next day I decided I'd been sober long enough, but I didn't have the patience to look for the key, so I just shot off the lock from the door. The bullet went through every suit on the rack." Harry turned around. There was another bullet hole in the back. A couple standing next to the Crams joined the fun inspecting the bullet holes in Harry's jacket. Williams drifted towards the living room. "And that's Harry Cram," he said. "I imagine he's here tonight because it would never occur to him that he shouldn't be. Now, see that lady standing over by the window, talking to the bald-headed man? She's Lila Mayhew. Her family is one of the oldest in Savannah. They've lived in 2 of Savannah's most important historic houses. She's a little dotty, though, so it's possible she doesn't even know that I've shot anybody." Williams left me and went back to the entrance hall, and I drew closer to Mrs. Mayhew. She was speaking to the bald man. "Now, where exactly did Jim shoot the young man?" Mrs. Mayhew, her voice sounding like that of a little lost girl. "I think it was in the chest," the man said. "No, I mean where in the house?" "Oh, in the study, across the hall where you put your coat." "And what did they do with the body?" she asked. "I'd suppose they buried it, wouldn't you?" "That's not what I mean," said Mrs. Mayhew. "Did they cremate it first or bury it whole?" "I couldn't tell you." "Because you know that happened to Grandmother, don't you?" "I certainly do," said the man. "Grandmother's body was sent to Jacksonville to be cremated." "Yes, I remember that well," he said. "That's a famous story." "And the crematorium sent her ashes back to us in an urn. We put the urn in the parlor until it could be interned at Bonaventura. But Father was a chemist, you know." "And a very good one, too," said the man. "The very best." "Father was feeling downcast and at loose ends. After supper, he took the urn downtown to his laboratory and performed tests on ashes. That's when he found out they were not Grandmother's at all. The ashes were pure oak. They'd sent us the ashes from an oak tree. We never did find out what happened to Grandmother. When Father passed on, we took no chances. We buried him just as he was when he died, in his raincoat. That's why I wondered if they cremated the young man Jim shot, and if they did, whether they know for certain they got his ashes back." Lila Mayhew trailed off into sort of a reverie, and the bald man peered out the living room window. "My God," he said, "here comes that Dawes woman. She's all in green from head to toe." Serena Dawes was just then coming up the walk on the arm of Luther Driggers. She was wrapped in a green feather boa, and her fingernails, toenails, and eyeshadow were green to match. Williams greeted them at the front door. "Our Emerald Bird has arrived at last," he said. "I need a drink and a place to rest my ankles," Serena said, blowing a kiss and sweeping past him into the living room. She settled herself in an armchair, arranging her ostrich feathers with one hand and scooping a martini from a passing tray with another. Her eyes swept the room. "Boy," she called to a short man with a camera, "come over here and take a picture of a real lady." Once the after-image of flashbulbs had cleared from Serena's vision, her gaze came to rest on a pretty young blonde woman. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure," Serena said sweetly. "I'm Serena Dawes." "My name is Anna," the blonde woman said. "I'm visiting from Sweden." "Isn't that nice?" said Serena. "And what brings you to Savannah?" "Well, it's such a beautiful city. I love to come here to look at it." "Really? Just to look? Is that all?" "I love architecture, and you have such beautiful houses here." "But you do have friends in Savannah," Serena persisted. "Oh, yes," said Anna. "Do tell me who." "Colonel Atwood." "Well," said Serena, fluffing her feathers, "why didn't you just say you've come to Savannah to fuck? We'd all have understood completely." A dark-haired gentleman bowed and kissed Serena's hand. "Serena, how lovely to see you out of bed."